folks can take them away with them earlier today. But we really want to get a discussion started about some of these ideas and kind of brainstorm around them, and also ask questions about some of these issues, or about things that are really important, maybe things we're missing. So I'm just going to go ahead and open it up. Is there any really major thing or any major questions anyone would like to start with?
Speak loudly if you could. So I'm trying to, if you could speak loudly, not just for the WMU, but for my little system up here.
Hi, my name's Elena, and I live in the Tacoma area of Washington, D.C. And I'm looking at this list, your bulleted list, and it concerns me that I don't see a reference to green space, specifically recreational space. Within my area, the nearest playground is 1 mile from my house, and the kids in my block, there are about 24 of them, play in the same dirty alley that we dump our trash. So I'd love to see that reference, and I don't think built environment really covers that.
I think we meant, when we said nature, I think that's what we meant. In our longer briefing, we give an example of a stretch objective for nature. We were calling it No Child Left Inside. Every child would be within a 10-minute walk of a park or playground, so that they could be outside, for example.
Well, there's a wonderful opportunity in my neighborhood of Walter Reed, which is also directly across the street from us. And there's wonderful opportunities in the sense of lovely green space that's currently there that is now being developed by the city. So I'd love to hear some discussion about Walter Reed in this as well.
Does anyone have anything to add as far as green space, parks?
I would actually like to see not only green space and parks, but all public infrastructure, whether it's schools or right-of-way or streets or whatever it is. I want to see ways to use that both on the part of the public sector and the private sector as ways to enhance sustainability. So I think there are a lot of regulations that would have to be developed so that, let's say there was a park that could underground be used for geothermal energy for property nearby, or you were going to manage stormwater in some of that infrastructure, but private owners wanted to use that as well. The regulations for who's responsible, how that works, how we can make that a workable solution, I think would add tremendously to the sustainability of the city.
I think that's a great thought, and I think both of those two comments that we've just heard raise an issue of scale. The scale at which we try to implement some of these ideas. We have some large sites like Walter Reed and St. Elizabeth's and Poplar Point and some others that give us a chance to experiment with what could we do if we were looking at something less than a quadrant, but more than a single building site, to try to build in these sustainability features. We think it works very differently if you have a little bit more area to play with, district heating and cooling, storm water, energy production. Potentially. All kinds of things are possible if you can play with that scale.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Jane Huntington, and I represent Macmillan Park, which and Sand Filtration Site, and that is a natural green roof that that has so many potentials for all of the things that we're talking about. And so I'm urging all of you to reconsider the development project that is currently looking like it's going forward. We have no parks in our area either, and we're having grocery stores and other things on gateway streets that we really need developed, and we really want this wonderful international treasure reconsidered. And I know all of you know about it, and I just want to tell you that yesterday the Cultural Landscape Foundation announced its selection of the site as one of its 2011 landslide properties, and landslides are parks and landscapes around the country at risk of losing a very valuable space. So you can go to Friends of Macmillan, become a friend on Facebook, or go to the Cultural Landscape Foundation website, TCLF, I think it is, .org. and find out more about this whole landslide program. Macmillan is in good company, and there are lots of landscapes around the country that are being looked at and trying to be saved, which we're hoping Macmillan will be.
Well, and I think it also highlights some of the issues that we really struggle with working in sustainability is how a space or a facility or a region, issues of scale, those spaces can be used for interrelated issues. It doesn't, having more green space has the kind of social impacts, the economic impacts, and potential for, say, energy generation. And I think that's a facet of sustainability that a lot of people really struggle with, is how do we make a facility or a neighborhood do more and on more different levels than just, say, green space or just jobs or just this. They can do all of those things if you just kind of plan ahead a little bit. So, yes, sir.
Let's say in November, the International Green Code is going to be released. So how about benchmarking your district against the IGC? And seeing how that can be adopted, altered, what we're doing for that, and publicly promote that. And if you can read the 1,138 pages, I'll be really impressed. So I think that would be a really good way, because there's some cities and some states have said they're willing to adopt it and look at it, but put it all on the table by then and roll it out when it's rolled out. So we're showing some leadership that as a city we're prepared to address that.
Oh my goodness. Yes, sir.
Okay. I wanted to know how the DC government is going to, and first of all, my name is Victor with Clean Water Action. And so I wanted to know how the DC government is going to prepare the public school system to, help, the city become more sustainable in how it, replenishes its, environmental knowledge. You talk about all the experts that are in the area. What about, establishing a sort of locally grown, expertise, because, folks have gone through elementary, middle, and high school in the area interacting with, such experts, with support from the government. So I think that's a key element in sustainability, especially if you're thinking about, a locally, homegrown, sustainable effort.
Well, this is an area where we'd love to hear some additional suggestions, but let me say two things that I neglected to say. One is that we're working with what we're calling the Green Cabinet. Given what we said, maybe green isn't the right term, but you get what I'm talking about. So about a dozen of the cabinet agencies, including the superintendent of schools and DCPS, are part of a group that's working alongside the public partners that we're going to have and the private partners that we're going to have to help develop the strategy and figure out for their agencies and their areas of expertise, how are they going to contribute to the sustainability of the city.
And so are they looking at green jobs or green careers, to Christophe's point? Because there's a difference between, installing a solar panel and being an environmental engineer or a geologist.
Keep in mind, literally we're starting right now. So I don't know what they want to do.
Consider that food for thought.
That's
Well,
exactly
that's
right.
exactly
That's
right.
exactly the kind of input that we wanna hear about, and even some ideas about how we might link together jobs into a career ladder. What's the training? What are the things that you would need to add? Already some of our schools have, are some of our most sustainable buildings in the city, because a lot of them have gone through renovation. Some of the first geothermal uses are at our public schools. I mean, some of the schools literally show the kids, what it's like, to have a more sustainable future. But we could do a lot more. Could they grow food? Could they demonstrably manage stormwater? Could they be literally demonstrating all the things that we're talking about? perhaps they could. So those are the kinds of ideas we really need to hear from.
Really quick, since we're on the topic, is there anyone from one of the universities here who has anything to add? Because I know that public schools can prepare students to enter university and train for a career like that. Are there any ongoing efforts or discussions going on at the university level?
I'll
Yes,
just add
sir.
something really quick. I'm part of a working group that's working on a DC environmental literacy plan in conjunction with DOE and a few other agencies, DCPS. So that's ongoing for the next year. It's actually mandated through the DC Healthy Schools Act, I believe. That's part of it. So just in response to that, there's some planning going on in that sector.
And so I just say, I'm Kat Schreier. I've been working with DC Water Resources Research Institute along with the Office of Sustainability with Joel and Howard at UDC, and we had a series of programs. One last year, the DC Area Water Issues Program, at least addressed some things about DC water, not DC water, but water in DC and in energy, water in DC, and jobs, training programs like Earth Conservation Corps. I've also been working with, I've been working with a number of organizations around town, like First Tee over at Langley Golf Course did a program with Audubon, and there was a high school right across the street, and we could not work directly with the high school, and this is something that the DC government can help with, because and I think a number of environmental groups have had similar issues with having programs to bring into the schools where the focus is on, the reading, writing, arithmetic requirements, that there isn't time within the curriculum, or there isn't an easy way to bring in programs when someone does have an opportunity where high school kids might be able to get involved in an event, or someone could come into the classroom and teach about a particular issue related to the same sustainability. That is something that could be facilitated perhaps a little more.
Can I get someone at the table? I've been neglecting the table. Yes, sir.
Me. Yeah. First of all, my name is Paul Walker with Global Green USA, which is your host here today at the meeting, and many others with Chris Weiss from the DC Environmental Network. So thank you, Christophe and Michelle and Harriet for coming today and talking about this. Let me just make a couple quick ones. Green space, I think, is very important, which was raised over here earlier. To me, that means, to some extent, tree planting. I just flew back 2 days ago from Vilnius, Lithuania, in Eastern Europe, in the Baltic states. And Vilnius, which is a fairly small city, the capital of Lithuania, though, is known as the greenest city in Europe, largely because of the green canopy. When you fly in over Vilnius, you can see the enormous amount of trees and green space that they've worked on since they came out from the Soviet era. I also think of Boston, Massachusetts, which is my home, and since we removed the big highway going through the middle of Boston and did the Big Dig, however controversial that is, we have this long swath now of green space which has been opened, and there's a lot of public discussion about how best to utilize that green space, and a real lack of money to actually redevelop it in an appropriate way. But it has really made a big difference in the city. So I think green space is very important. To me, it also means cleaning up brownfields and making sure that toxic waste remediation is a major part of a sustainable city. We know that a lot of the illnesses in the city come from toxic waste. We know whether it's Spring Valley and chemical weapons from World War I up in Northwest, or whether it's dump sites or old military sites like Walter Reed and all. So I think putting a priority on bringing brownfields back to greenfields and redeveloping those, making them healthy green sites is extremely important too. And the last point I want to make is we spend a lot of our time in Global Green and Gorbachev's Green Cross all over the world facilitating really contentious issues like high toxic waste cleanup, weapons demilitarization, destruction programs of toxic waste and the like. And I think you shouldn't overlook, as I'm sure you all know, you shouldn't overlook the facilitation process. It's very important, I think, to make sure all stakeholders feel part of this sustainable DC process. I'm glad, seem to be starting out that way. I think it's very important if there's a green ribbon committee that it's really inclusive, and that you really do maybe the first year really make a major part as a listening tool within the city. This is such a diverse area with so many different religions and ethnicities and economic classes, and racial profile, all the rest, it really is important, I think, to focus a lot on the facilitation aspect. And part of that should be awareness raising. And I think maybe you need a couple of poster child showcase projects to work on. And I'm not sure what that might be. Maybe the new convention center downtown should really have a major piece of it being green energy or sustainable, built environment or something along those lines. We had proposed a few years ago to the Pentagon, actually to the Department of Defense, that they cover the Pentagon parking lot with solar PV, photovoltaics. And we had 3 fairly productive meetings over in the Pentagon, we meaning a bunch of environmental NGOs here. And in the end, the Pentagon said, oh, no, it's not really economically competitive and viable because we get such subsidized rates in Northern Virginia for energy. And number 2, we're worried about security in the parking lot. I'm not quite sure what that means, but they never followed through on it. But we perceive that as kind of a poster child for alternative sustainable energy. And I think we need to think about that in the district to really raise awareness and bring attention to it, not only within the district, but really nationally and internationally.
Well, Paul, just a quick comment. I would imagine, given the military's national security concerns about their facilities and the vulnerability that is established, the same principle as I was articulating for the district, they want to be not dependent. It doesn't matter how cheap it is. That's also unreliable. And so for military installations around the world, what they're doing, the best they can do is to make them independent from external energy sources, to create a net zero environment for energy, for water use, for waste. So we're counting on them to be a good partner and to demonstrate some of this stuff. What I'm trying to say is this may be a much better time to approach them about that project in the parking lot than it was.
They have it at FedEx Field now, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hi, I'm from Van Ness North Cooperative, and my energy committee was reading this article in the New York Times, which you might have seen on the 19th of September, talking about the consortium of private individuals and private companies with Branson and some other people involved, which would make money available for retrofitting existing stock of commercial buildings. We're just wondering, is the district thinking about that? It sounds a little bit like PACE, except I think PACE was actually dependent upon tax revenues, and this would not. This would be an infrastructure investment facility. Has anyone thought about this, or is anyone aware of this?
The Carbon War Room is located here, very closely affiliated with Branson and his interests. We are actually moving forward with a commercial PACE program here. We have $250 million of bond authority that the council has provided to us to make that sort of a program work. But the bottom line is thinking about all sorts of opportunities for finance. And I think when we talk about the energy issues more broadly, there are some examples of very innovative financing that are driving renewable deployment aggressively in places like Germany, for example, where they've established a feed-in tariff that would pay people who are making those kinds of renewable investments a fairly attractive price for the electricity they're able to contribute back into the community. So anyway, it's a good idea. We'll make sure to check that article and see what we can learn.
Can I ask a question of you guys? A lot of what you're saying to me is maybe even helpful for the 2013 budget, but you're kind of asking, what are we doing now? I want you to tell me, what should we be doing 10 years from now and 20 years from now? And believe me, if we're already doing it, then you're not asking an ambitious enough question. So the question is, how do we retrofit all the buildings in the District of Columbia, and when should we do that by?
And to what standard?
Exactly. That.
Can we talk trash for just a second?
Please.
And I think waste is a great broad category, and I'm sure you chose that word carefully, but I think we should call it, kind of things that people recognize, like trash. And so I think about industrial composting and the market-based incentives, as well as the sort of policy and regulatory changes that might be required to allow for the natural principles of our world to be incorporated into our built environment. So people are composting a little bit at home, but we can scale that up and do sort of industrial for restaurants and for hotels and for all those buildings that you want to retrofit. So thinking about that in that vein.
And ideas
Well,
for how
you
we
can
can
also
take some of
collect
what's
from-
considered waste
That's
and
right.
actually having it be a fuel source.
Exactly.
Was something
Yeah,
Wendell's
so that it
working
can
on.
give back. It
So
doesn't
in other
just
words,
stay
we need to
somewhere.
be very expansive and say, look, are these truly waste materials? And if they are truly not, construction waste is another good example, then what are we going to do with it? And how do we benefit from it? So that's a really good point.
And I think in just, like trash-free facilities, we have a little bit of a very nascent program with less than 24 organizations that have signed on, and maybe the district can make a really strong statement by committing to make all of its buildings trash-free. You'd be welcome to make that announcement at the Trash Summit on the 19th of October if you like.
Yes, sir, in the corner.
Ernest Jolly with DC Water, and I still will attempt to focus 10 years out, but I would like to raise that we have to do that with the reality of the presence in mind. And with that, something that I think someone said at the very beginning certainly caught my attention, and it was the idea of the funding we have already planned to spend on infrastructure, and how do we think about and expand the deployment of that funding source for sustainable infrastructure. And one of the challenges, when all things are said and done, the one thing we'll always do is what we're legally mandated to do. And so I wonder, I had an internal reaction when I heard MS4 will be the most stringent in the country, because we know the consequences of the most stringent as relates to a number of things that we deal with, and the consequences are not only environmental improvement, but they're economical. And so I would suggest that if we could think about how we analyze the kinds of laws, regulations, consent decrees that in most cases were put in place 8, 10, 20 years ago, and we're running to comply with based on what was known at that time, which may not be a sustainable solution if we were to evaluate it today. So if we could come up as a part of this process with a way to analyze the current and proposed MS4 against sustainability, the kinds of enhanced nitrogen removal in terms of all the kinds of things we're doing with storm water management, CSOs, and say, if in fact we did not have a consent decree that mandates doing X, Y, and Z, how would we approach that and so forth? Recognize in some cases you won't be able to change what you have, but also recognizing that there may be an opportunity to use existing planned funding to accomplish a sustainable solution. Because in many cases, like I said, we're dealing with a legal reality created 10, 15 years ago, and I think in many cases we would argue we may be smarter about how we would get there. So if there could be a way in which to work with the regulatory agencies, both at the district and local levels, to say, let's walk through this with a sustainable point of view, recognizing it's like a court settlement. Nothing is settled until everything is settled. But we ought to go through the exercise as a part of this. That's what will help keep our attention, I think. And I think we could also lend our expertise and could gain a lot. And it's, in all fairness, in some ways, we begin to do that as it relates to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and begin to have those discussions. Understanding you have the regulation here, but what might be a sustainable approach? Yeah. Because using planned funding for infrastructure in a sustainable infrastructure way is what's going to be important. Because we just can't hit our ratepayers and the communities with another big dollar. We need to find out how to make those big dollars create sustainable. Kind of long, but hope
I think we know what you're saying.
Hope there's a point in there.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
If you want to know what we should be doing 10, 20 years down the road, there's a terrific opportunity in DC right now with the solar decathlon. Go and talk to the students. I've been working with students at GW, Georgetown, and AU every year with the Alice Ferguson Foundation's Potomac River Cleanup. We had 80 students from Eco Action, Eco Sense, and Green GW. I was with Green GW just last night we were talking about the various green events that are going on. But the comprehensive plan talks about the green ribbon of Spring Valley Parks. Spring Valley Parks. I didn't say that right, but anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Those, there are several of those in our
Ford
neighborhood.
Circle Parks?
No, it's Stream Valley Parks. Stream Valley Parks. And these are all watersheds that collect stormwater runoff. If we could focus on the streets that border these parks and turn them into green streets, reduce the impervious pavement, introduce bioswales, rain gardens to intercept the polluted stormwater before it enters the park. In our neighborhood, we have Battery Kimball, which the Appalachia Trail Club has written off. They say it's beyond help. We have Glover Archibald Park, where Rachel Carson brought her students when she was riding the Silent Spring. We have Whitehaven Park and Wesley Heights Park. All of these parks they're surrounded by permeable paving. If we took out some of the impervious paving and treated the stormwater runoff before it entered the parks, I think we'll step in the right direction.
I think you're singing Ernest's tune there.
Yeah. Now, if I could just say something about investments in infrastructure that last for the next decade or two, from my personal experience, I worked at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. They wanted to move towards zero waste for a university of 35,000 odd students. And one of the things they did was they looked at available technologies and infrastructure available in the wider Sydney metropolitan area. They have a huge problem with landfill space. There isn't any. They found a facility that came out of technology from Israel that sorts waste to an incredible degree. And what they ended up doing is a one-bin system where everyone on campus put everything in one bin. They went to the magic facility. It was sorted mechanically and also by hand. And then it was composted, recycled, used to generate energy. They had 80% diversion from landfill, and the things that went to the landfill were basically things that no one could do anything with. It wasn't useful, it couldn't be recycled, or it was coming out of the laboratories, for example, and involved hazardous waste. So, and a facility like that is a 10, 20-year investment. If it has the footprint to expand or improve over the years, something like that can generate electricity. It was a net exporting electricity generating facility. It can compost and provide sandwich for a huge community, but it can deal with a huge amount of waste and a huge variety of waste. Listen.
I'm a little alarmed.
Can I ask a question on the phone?
Just a sec.
1 second, please.
Yeah, Jim Shulman, let me just go forward with this. Director Tulou and you, Ms. Bennett, are talking about sort of mixing everything together and then sorting it out again. And sometimes that might make sense. But one can get 85-90% diversion just by source separating. So, and with construction materials, I'm alarmed when I hear about burning construction materials, because if we know we can get 85 to 90% reused and diverted, why should we be burning that stuff? And so the rationale here is we shouldn't be burning anything given our climate constraints. So I just put that on the table. Yes, there are fantastic technologies that can do whiz-bang things, but I've been on some of those top-notch assembly lines, and the guy said, well, this is the same kind of technology we had in the 80s. It may not be as whiz-bang as you think. So.
Just on the telephone real quick, your question?
Yeah, this is Greg Drury with Homeless. I have two contradictory things. I'll say the first is to have some overall vision goals, something like DC goes off the grid in 25 years. You know, all the things that come into play with that are numerous, obviously, but maybe 90% of all stormwater gets retained before it goes into the river or tributaries. You know, really high visionary kind of statements, and then we kind of live into that. And the second thing, which is kind of contradictory, is a lot of the things that I've heard reported about what we're doing seem like they're power-oriented, or we want to be better than this country or that city, a little bit of greenwashing mentality maybe, and obviously that's good, because whatever makes us green is good, right? But if we can implement some sort of cultural change, which is maybe more of a Japanese sort of mentality, which is more flowing, or something that is more organic, then we want to be better than somebody else. So that's my 2 input.
We have 10 minutes, so let's see. Can I just respond to one thing that was said? I appreciate those comments. Those stretch objectives, those kind of goals, that is absolutely what we want the plan to result in. So, you know, if you have ideas that, like the gentleman on the phone suggested, that are kind of in that direction, maybe something you've been carrying around, you know, that maybe we'd be, you know, 80% self-sufficient in food in 20 years, or whatever that might be. Those would be helpful to hear also.
Okay, I'm trying to see an area of the room I haven't gotten to yet. Yes, sir.
I probably you've taken online the ecological footprint quiz, where you fill out a bunch of information about your energy use and your food habits and other things, and then it tells you how many planets it would take, and it's very, very hard living in the United States to get down to one planet. Has anyone ever done it? Could that be scaled up to the city level and say, is it possible for a city to live on one planet? Because it seems to me, I don't know what they exactly mean, whether they're saying that there's no sustainability in terms of climate change or what they're saying, but they're saying something is out of balance, because they're saying that you're not living on one planet. So there's something that's out of balance there, and if it's possible to somehow figure out what that is and try to see if it can be changed, that would be something that would be a stretch.
There actually, you may want to check, there's an organization called One Planet Living, run by Bioregional out of the UK. It has 12 international city-sized communities that are being developed, looking at detailed metrics across those areas: zero waste, zero energy, zero water, and they have been fairly effective. But they're pushing exactly that type of question: how do you make a whole city a one-planet city?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I do think this is a tremendous opportunity to not just have a sustainable city, but have an inclusive city, and so I'm so glad to hear that. And this is not a 10-year kind of stretch goal, but I think it's important nonetheless, is to really, when the green plan comes out, think both quantitatively and qualitatively about what the actual labor market opportunities are going to be that are going to be produced, and try to get a good sense of that, but then also to work with the Department of Employment Services and DEMPED to really make sure that we're developing appropriate training programs so that this promise really does lead to jobs for DC residents.
We're running out of time, so let me just ask people to think about really big targets or goals, like net energy export, something like that, and just kind of throw out some dream numbers that we really want to go for. Yes, sir.
My name is Mark Bennett with the Sierra Club. One of the things I'm looking at international projects is finding a baseline. Yeah. And the person on the phone mentioned about goals. But we need to find out, where can we find that kind of information, find the baseline. For example, we have 20% pervious services in DC. Our goal is to have maybe less than that. Where can we find the baselines? On the DDO website or some university study? We need a baseline to start from, because that's about how CDM projects can actually go about in order to reach those goals.
And I will say some of the groundwork has already been laid with some of the other plans that we've done, and even commenting on EPA's draft permit required us to do a lot of analysis about where we were starting. But that's an excellent point. We can't know where we're going to go unless we understand where we're starting from. So any goal will have a baseline so we know where we're starting from.
All right, so a big, yes?
We don't have a water footprint for this stuff, do we?
We've got one. We may not know how big it is. But yeah.
The amount of water we use, not only in the city, but I think I did a webinar yesterday, it was like about 1,500 gallons of water a day per person for everything we buy, eat.
It's a big issue.
And the Anacostia is the sustainability issue in the city. So why can't we have a goal of looking at our water footprint, having a goal to reduce that every which way we can, either storm, we have all these regulatory programs and all these incentives and DC Water, why can't we bring all that together and have a reduction goal?
Okay, in the corner, please.
Yeah, in 10 years, I think there should be a car-free zone in downtown DC, and also at least 600,000 bike share bikes, one for each person.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and just using your I guess, target date arbitrarily, zero illegal dumping in the city, zero amount of abandoned homes in the city, reused for sustainable purposes.
Yes, ma'am.
So this may be a goal that's a little harder to measure, but I would like to see a city where all of our residents and all of our community members, no matter what field they're in, are thinking about every single one of these categories intuitively. That it doesn't just have to be a sustainability commission doing it, or a waste task force, but this is a natural understanding.
Yes, ma'am.
With a goal of zero waste, and then the idea being how you develop how you're going to achieve that, whether it be a magic facility or lots of composting, or waste reduction, or reusing.
Yes, sir.
Along the lines of what you were speaking about, intuitive, perhaps our goal would be not to have any economic incentives that encourage unsustainable activities. I mean, right now we encourage people to ride transit. Oh, but by the way, it appears to be cheaper to drive and park. I mean, that type of thing. If we can get the economic incentives aligned with our public policy objectives, it's a lot easier to get people to do what we think they ought to do. And there are techniques for doing that.
You know what? I'm